I opened the email receipt by accident. It wasn't even meant for me. Just one of those auto-forwarded confirmations that lands in a shared inbox because we've been lazy about separating accounts. I was looking for a drywall supplier invoice for a job, thumb scrolling, half awake, coffee cooling beside my laptop. Then I saw the number. $86. A waterfront lounge in Tampa. Not a chain. Not a drive-through mistake. A place with reservations and soft lighting, the kind of place you go when you're trying to be seen. I clicked it open, expecting something boring, an overcharge, a spam receipt, maybe a fraud alert. Instead, the details sat there like they'd been typed for me personally. Reservation for 2. Name, Daniel Harper. Time, 6:15 p.m. And right beneath it, clean, automatic, unquestionable, the timestamp. 6:15 p.m. The exact time Melissa had texted me. Yoga ran late. I'll be home soon. I stared at that line longer than I should have. Not because I didn't understand it, because I understood it too fast. I waited for the usual things to happen. The heat in the face, the rush of anger, the panicked need to explain it away. I'd heard guys talk about that moment like it was a glass shattering in your chest. For me, it wasn't that. Something in me didn't explode. It didn't shatter. It just went cold. Cold and clear. Like a job site when the generator dies and every sound drops out at once. You suddenly hear what's been there all along. The wind, the distant traffic, the truth of how quiet it can get when the noise stops pretending to be normal. I looked at the receipt again. I checked the date. I checked the time. I checked the name. Then I set the phone down on the counter like it was heavier than it was. From the living room, I could hear the kids arguing over a controller. Normal voices. Normal life. The kind of life you protect by not asking certain questions. I picked the phone back up and took a screenshot. Not for drama. Not for revenge. Just because something inside me had started treating this like a fact that needed to be kept. And in that second, I realized I wasn't going to confront her when she walked in. I was going to watch. We'd been married 13 years, which is long enough for the calendar to start running your life instead of the other way around. 2 kids. A mortgage. A house that always needed something. Mulch in spring, a new water heater in fall. Repainting the hallway because someone dragged a backpack along it every single morning like it was their job. I worked operations for a commercial contractor. The kind of work where your brain never really shuts off. Schedules, subs, materials, change orders, the constant arithmetic of time and money. Melissa worked in marketing for a medical group and talked in polished sentences even when she was tired. We lived on routine because routine made everything possible. Carpool lanes, school lunches, soccer cleats, the Costco runs that felt like a monthly tax. Saturday mornings were our soft spot. Pancakes if we were trying. Frozen waffles if we weren't. Coffee for me, a fancier oat milk thing for her that she swore wasn't a phase. We'd sit at the island while the kids argued about cartoons, and I'd half listen, half watch sunlight move across the tile, thinking this is what we built. 2 years ago, Melissa started yoga. At first it was normal. A class after work, a mat in the closet, a little soreness in her shoulders. I even liked it. She seemed lighter, like someone had taken a backpack off her. She bought new leggings, and I made dumb jokes about how every brand name sounded like an airport code. She'd laugh, roll her eyes, and kiss my cheek like I was harmless. Then it became a thing. The bag by the door. The water bottle with the little time marks on the side. The posted schedule on the fridge that looked more like a training plan than a hobby. Saturday sessions. Evening sessions. Workshops. Breath work. Words that sounded peaceful, but somehow left her more distant when she came home. I noticed she did her makeup before class. Not heavy, just enough to look intentional. Mascara, concealer, lip tint. I told myself she wanted to feel good, and that was allowed. I noticed she started wearing earrings more often, small ones that caught light when she turned her head. When I asked, she said, "I just felt like it." And the answer was so casual I let it float right past me. Her phone became a private room. Password changed. Screen turned down. If a notification popped up, she'd tilt it away without thinking. When I asked once, just once, she said it was for work, and that HIPAA made everything complicated. I didn't argue because I didn't want to be the guy who needed access to prove he trusted his wife. Late returns were extra meditation. A teacher chat. We grabbed smoothies after. She'd say it like it was nothing, like the words themselves should settle me. And most nights, I let them. The kids needed stability. I needed sleep. I had bids due and payroll to run and a life that didn't have room for paranoia. So I didn't look too hard. I told myself marriage was patience. I told myself seasons change. I told myself I was lucky she still came home at all. And now, with that receipt burned into my head, I understood something I hadn't wanted to understand for 2 years. I hadn't been trusting her. I'd been avoiding the cost of finding out. After that receipt, everything rearranged itself. Not dramatically, not all at once. It was more like one of those hidden image puzzles the kids used to bring home from school. At first it's just noise. Then someone points out the outline of a face, and suddenly you can't unsee it. The faint smell of cologne the night, she blamed it on a crowded elevator downtown. I had accepted that explanation because it came quickly, smoothly. Too smoothly, I realized now. The scent hadn't been generic. It had been deliberate. Wood and citrus. Not something that floats off a stranger by accident. The new earrings she'd bought, just because. Small gold hoops at first. Then something a little more refined. Nothing extravagant. Just curated. I remembered watching her put them in before yoga one evening, checking her reflection with a focus that wasn't about stretching. The distance in our bedroom hadn't happened overnight. It had been a slow dimming. A shift from spontaneous to scheduled. Then from scheduled to postponed. Headaches. Early mornings. I'm just tired. I tried to be understanding. I'd offered to take on more around the house. Cooked more dinners. Planned a weekend trip she said she couldn't take because of a work rollout. I'd thought if I showed up stronger, steadier, more attentive, something would recalibrate. But after the receipt, I stopped trying to solve it like a problem. I started observing it like a pattern. Her yoga days were consistent. Tuesdays, Thursdays, Saturdays. The texts would come at predictable intervals. Class starting. Running late. Be home soon. The phrasing barely changed. Like templates. I scrolled back through months of messages, not obsessively, methodically. I checked timestamps. Compared them to calendar entries. Cross-referenced them with bank statements. Small restaurant charges that hadn't registered at the time. Parking fees near the waterfront. Gas purchases in a part of town nowhere near her studio. The quiet voice in my head, the one I'd been arguing with for 2 years, stopped needing to argue. For the first time, I let the thought exist without defending her. I didn't rush to conclusions. I didn't storm into the yoga studio. I didn't text the name on the receipt. I just stopped protecting her in my own mind. That was the real shift. Up until then, every inconsistency had been met with an internal lawyer. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe you're tired. Maybe marriage just looks like this after a decade. I'd been cross-examining my own instincts, dismissing them for lack of evidence. Now I had evidence. Not proof of everything, but proof of enough. When she walked through the door that night, flushed from the Florida humidity, yoga mat slung over her shoulder, she looked exactly like she always did. She kissed the kids. She asked about my day. She poured herself water and leaned against the counter like we were inside a normal evening. I watched her. Not suspiciously. Not accusingly. Just clearly. I noticed the way she avoided setting her phone down too far from her hand. The way she didn't meet my eyes for more than a second at a time. The way her voice was slightly overbright, like someone performing calm. I answered her questions evenly. Told her about a delayed shipment and a subcontractor who couldn't read blueprints. She nodded in the right places. Smiled when she was supposed to. We moved around each other like practiced dancers. And somewhere inside me, a decision formed, not about what to do, but about how to be. If you've made it this far, this story clearly caught your attention. If you're enjoying it, drop a like on the video. It helps me see what kind of stories you want more of next. Let's keep going. I wasn't going to confront her without knowing the full shape of it. I wasn't going to accuse her based on instinct alone. I was going to let the pattern finish drawing itself. And I was going to stand still long enough to see it. I stopped trying to be a better husband. That sounds worse than it is. I didn't become cruel. I didn't withdraw from the kids or stop paying attention to the house. I just stopped performing improvement like it was a lever I could pull to fix something I didn't break. For months, maybe longer, I had been adjusting myself in small ways. Talking softer when she seemed irritated. Picking up extra grocery runs so she could rest. Suggesting date nights she'd often reschedule. I'd been tightening bolts on a structure that wasn't failing because of loose screws. After the receipt, I understood something simple. If this was real, if there was someone else, then she had already stepped outside the marriage. Not emotionally confused. Not temporarily distant. Deliberately outside. And I wasn't going to chase someone who had already left. That was the turning point. I didn't ask questions, not because I was afraid of answers, but because questions would have given her space to rearrange the narrative, to smooth it, to cry, to say I was imagining things. I'd seen enough negotiations in business to know that whoever speaks first often gives away leverage. So I went quiet. Not cold, not hostile, just still. I stopped initiating conversations about us. Stopped asking if she was happy. Stopped offering solutions to problems she didn't name. When she mentioned feeling stressed, I listened, but I didn't scramble to absorb it for her. Internally, I shifted from husband trying to repair to man assessing reality. I opened a separate checking account at a different bank. Not dramatically, just preparation. I reviewed our mortgage terms. Looked at equity. Researched state divorce statutes late at night after everyone was asleep. Custody schedules. Asset division. Nothing emotional. Just information. At work, I found myself calmer than usual. A delay on a project didn't rattle me. A supplier issue didn't spike my pulse. Compared to what I was now considering, drywall and deadlines felt manageable. At home, I watched patterns solidify. Her yoga schedule never wavered. The same nights. The same soft urgency when she glanced at the clock. She'd shower before leaving, which hadn't been the case in the beginning. Subtle perfume. A different one than she wore to the office. I noticed she started guarding small details. If I asked what pose they worked on, she'd give a vague answer. Flow stuff. Core. Words without texture. It wasn't anger I felt. It was recognition. I realized I had been afraid of losing her. Afraid of blowing up the family. Afraid of being wrong. But once I accepted that the marriage I thought I had might already be gone, the fear thinned out. What's already broken can't be broken again. The question stopped being, how do I fix this? It became, what do I need to know? I slept differently after that. Not worse. Just lighter. Like part of my brain had stopped pretending. One night, she reached for my hand on the couch while we watched something forgettable on TV. Her fingers rested there, warm and familiar. I didn't pull away, but I didn't squeeze back either. I realized then that love, when it shifts, doesn't always collapse with noise. Sometimes it just changes weight. And I was no longer carrying what wasn't mine. Once I made the decision to stop guessing, everything became procedural. I went back through our joint credit card statements for the past 18 months. Not skimming, studying. I exported them into a spreadsheet the same way I would job cost reports. Dates down the left column. Merchant names next to them. Amounts aligned clean and unemotional. Patterns surfaced quickly. The waterfront lounge wasn't a one-off. Same place, roughly the same amount, every other Saturday. Sometimes a slight variation, $1.92, $104, but always 2 entrees, drinks, tax, tip. The timestamps lined up with her extended sessions. There were other places too. A seafood spot near the marina. A wine bar tucked behind a hotel. Once I mapped them, they formed a small radius along the coast. Her yoga studio was 15 miles inland. I didn't confront her. Instead, I placed a small GPS tracker in her car. I didn't feel proud of that. I didn't feel ashamed either. It was a decision made the same way I'd decide to install a camera on a job site after tools went missing. Not because I wanted trouble, but because clarity prevents it. The first Saturday after I placed it, I watched the location ping from my phone. 5:42 p.m. Leaving the house. 6:03 p.m. Highway South. 6:17 p.m. Waterfront District. No deviation. At 8:41 p.m., the car moved again. Not home. It drove 10 minutes farther west, toward a stretch of private rentals along the water. The kind of cottages people book for anniversaries or quiet weekends. It stayed there until 11:56 p.m. Then it came home. I didn't text her. I didn't call. I sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and wrote down times. Nothing else. Just facts. The following Tuesday, I watched again. Studio parking lot for exactly 7 minutes. Then the car left. Restaurant. Different one. Same radius. Cottage. Back home. Precise as clockwork. After 3 weeks of confirming the pattern, I hired a private investigator. Not because I doubted what I was seeing, but because screenshots aren't evidence. Documentation is. We met in a quiet office building near downtown. I laid out the timeline without emotion. He nodded like he'd heard this story 100 times, which I'm sure he had. We agreed on surveillance days. He asked for photos of her, the vehicle details, and any known name connected to the other party. I gave him Daniel Harper. 2 weeks later, He handed me a folder. Printed photographs. Date stamps. Her car parked beside a silver SUV registered to Daniel Harper. Them walking into the same coastal cottage. Him with his hand on the small of her back. Not intimate enough to deny. Not innocent enough to explain. There were timestamps matching the receipts. Matching the GPS logs. Matching her texts to me. It wasn't dramatic. It was structured. Dates. Photos. Facts. I drove home with the folder on the passenger seat and felt something settle. Suspicion is exhausting. Documentation is quiet. That night, when she said yoga had been restorative, I nodded, and I wrote the time down. Up until that point, everything had been contained inside the borders of my own house. My marriage, my wife, my children, my quiet documentation. Daniel Harper had been a name on a receipt, a man in photographs, a vehicle registration number printed neatly in the investigator's report. He existed, but only as a variable in my equation. That changed the night I sat down and looked him up properly. Public company, mid-level executive, listed on quarterly earnings calls. There were headshots online, corporate smile, press suit, the kind of biography that mentions volunteer work and family values near the end. I saw his wife in a charity gala photo. 2 teenagers standing between them, dressed like they'd been coached to behave. This wasn't some drifting single guy chasing distraction. This was a man with infrastructure, which meant what Melissa and Daniel had built wasn't just reckless, it was calculated. I printed everything. His employment profile, board listings, corporate ethics policy downloaded straight from the company website, clauses about reputational harm, morality standards, conduct expectations for leadership. I didn't feel vindictive reading it. I felt strategic. The investigator confirmed Daniel's vehicle was registered to his home address, shared with his wife. Same address tied to the cottage rental agreement. Not a hotel booked under a false name. A legitimate, recurring short-term lease under his own. That told me something important. He didn't expect exposure. People who expect exposure hide better. I met with an attorney the following week. A quiet office. Framed diplomas. The kind of place where voices stay even. I laid out the documentation in sequence, receipts, GPS logs, surveillance photos, timestamps. He flipped through it carefully. This is thorough, he said. I nodded. I hadn't intended it to be emotional. Just complete. He explained options without embellishment. Divorce grounds. Asset division. Custody considerations. And then something else. Civil action for interference in the marriage. Not dramatic. Not guaranteed. But viable. Especially, he added, tapping the photo of Daniel's SUV, if the other party has assets and public standing. That's when it shifted from personal betrayal to legal exposure. Court records are public. Filings are searchable. Depositions create transcripts. Companies notice when executives appear in civil suits involving adultery and financial damages. I didn't need revenge. I needed leverage. Back home, Melissa moved through the kitchen like any other Thursday, packing lunches, asking our daughter about a spelling test, mentioning she might be late Saturday because of a special workshop. I watched her the way you watch a structure before demolition, measuring which walls are load-bearing. Daniel's life wasn't separate from mine anymore. It intersected with finances, with potential settlements, with custody stability for my kids. This wasn't about catching them. It was about protecting what would remain when everything collapsed. I organized the folder into sections. Personal evidence, financial impact, external party documentation, clean, indexed, ready. For the first time since opening that receipt, I felt something close to control, not over her choices, but over mine. I chose a Tuesday, not because it was symbolic, because it was ordinary. The kids had homework. Trash pickup was in the morning, the kind of night that doesn't expect to be remembered. I waited until they were upstairs. Melissa was at the kitchen counter, scrolling through her phone, one ankle crossed over the other. The overhead light cast a clean circle across the granite. I walked in carrying the folder. Not rushed. Not hesitant. I set it down in front of her. I didn't say anything. At first she looked annoyed, like I was interrupting something. Then she saw the thickness of it. The tabs. The printed photos visible through the top sheet. Her expression shifted, not dramatically. Just a tightening around the eyes. "What's this?" she asked. I took a seat across from her. "You should look at it." She hesitated before opening it. That hesitation told me more than any denial would have. The first page was the waterfront receipt, then the spreadsheet summary, then the GPS logs, then the surveillance photos, date and time stamped in black text at the bottom corner. She flipped slowly at first, then faster. Her breathing changed before her voice did. When she reached the photo of her walking into the coastal cottage beside Daniel, she stopped. Silence filled the kitchen. Not loud, just complete. Finally, she said, "How long have you known?" "Long enough," I answered. There were no theatrics, no collapsing into a chair, no screaming, just a woman staring at documented reality. "I felt invisible," she said after a while, eyes still on the page. "It wasn't supposed to go this far." I didn't interrupt. "It started as just talking," she added. "You were always busy." We stopped connecting. I let the words sit there. They sounded rehearsed, like something she'd told herself before. "How long?" I asked. She swallowed. "Almost 2 years." 2 years. The number didn't hit like a punch. It settled like weight. I nodded once. "I'm filing for divorce," I said. The words were steady, not loud, not threatening, just final. She looked up then, really looked at me, like she was searching for the version of me that might still negotiate. "You're not even going to fight for this?" she asked. "I did," I said. "For 2 years. I just didn't know what I was fighting." Tears formed, but didn't fall. She closed the folder slowly, palms resting on top of it, as if pressure could flatten what was inside. "What about the kids?" she asked. "We'll handle custody fairly," I replied. "They won't be collateral." "And Daniel?" she said, barely above a whisper. "That's already handled," I said. She understood what that meant. The room felt smaller, but clearer. There was nothing left to argue about. No mystery. No accusation hanging in the air. Just evidence. Just consequence. I stood up first. "I'll have the paperwork drafted this week," I said. She didn't try to stop me. And for the first time in 13 years, I walked upstairs without wondering what she was thinking. Once the conversation happened, everything moved without raised voices. I retained counsel the following morning. The paperwork was filed within a week. Florida is procedural about these things. Forms, disclosures, timelines. No one asks how you feel. They ask for statements, balances, valuations. Melissa hired her own attorney. Communication shifted immediately to email threads with subject lines that included case numbers. It was almost clinical. Attachments replaced apologies. Deadlines replaced emotion. The civil component regarding Daniel was introduced carefully. My attorney sent a notice outlining the documented affair, the duration, and the financial and emotional impact on the marriage. It wasn't theatrical. It was structured, accompanied by the investigator's report, photographs, and transaction summaries. Within 10 days, Daniel retained representation. There were no denials, only negotiations. His legal team understood what public filings could mean. A civil suit naming a corporate executive in a multi-year extramarital affair carries implications beyond personal embarrassment. Board scrutiny, shareholder concern, internal compliance reviews. They requested discretion. In exchange, they offered settlement discussions. The number we eventually agreed on was $52,000. Not because that amount reflected pain. Pain isn't quantifiable. It reflected leverage, risk assessment, and the cost of exposure versus resolution. The agreement included confidentiality and a withdrawal of further claims upon payment. When the wire confirmation came through, I stared at the notification longer than I expected. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like completion of a transaction. The divorce proceedings continued separately. Asset division was straightforward. We sold the house rather than argue over equity. Watching the listing photos go live was strange. Rooms we'd painted together staged to look like no one had ever lived there. Showings came quickly. An offer followed within 3 weeks. The kids were told in the simplest terms possible. We explained that mom and dad would be living in different houses, but both of us would always be their parents. They asked practical questions, where their beds would go, whether the dog would travel back and forth. We settled on a week-on, week-off schedule. Structured, predictable. I insisted on consistency for them. Same school, same routines, stability above all. Melissa moved into a townhouse closer to her office. I rented a smaller place temporarily while I looked for something permanent. There were no dramatic final fights. No last-minute confessions. Daniel, I was told through legal channels, had recommitted to his marriage. Whether that was truth or performance no longer concerned me. Events carried themselves forward without me forcing them. Mediation sessions were efficient. Signatures collected. Dates set. When I packed the last box out of the house, I walked through each room once. Not to relive anything, just to confirm it was empty. It felt less like loss and more like the end of a contract. The structure had failed inspection, and now it was cleared. The final hearing lasted less than 20 minutes. We sat at separate tables. Same room, same judge, different attorneys speaking on our behalf, like we were business entities dissolving a partnership. The language was neutral, irretrievably broken. Mutual agreement. Custody framework established. When the judge asked if the marriage could be saved, neither of us hesitated. No, Your Honor. It wasn't anger that made it easy to say. It was accuracy. I signed the final papers with the same pen I use at work to approve invoices. Black ink. Consistent pressure. My name looked steadier than I expected. Melissa didn't cry. She kept her posture straight, voice measured. If there was regret, it stayed internal. I didn't search her face for it. Outside the courthouse, we stood for a moment without speaking. Cars passed. People moved around us with their own timelines. I never meant for it to end like this, she said quietly. It ended when it started, I replied. There was nothing more to add. A few weeks later, I heard through indirect channels that Daniel had returned fully to his family. Public appearances resumed. Social media photos reappeared. Holiday dinners, corporate events, anniversary captions that read like damage control. I didn't monitor it. The information just reached me the way small-town news does, even in a city. Melissa and I settled into the custody rhythm. Week on, week off. Exchanges in parking lots or curbside drop-offs. Civil, efficient. Conversations limited to school schedules and medical appointments. The house sale closed. Proceeds divided according to the agreement. The settlement funds cleared fully. Accounts separated cleanly. The first night alone in my new place without the kids was the hardest. Not because I missed her, but because silence behaves differently when it isn't shared. Every sound echoes a little longer. Every hour stretches. I expected anger to surface once everything was finalized. It didn't. I expected satisfaction when the money hit my account. That didn't arrive either. What I felt was something quieter. Relief. Not relief that she was gone. Relief that uncertainty was gone. There's a particular exhaustion that comes from suspecting something but not knowing. From sensing fractures but pretending they're hairline cracks. Living inside that tension drains you in ways you don't notice until it stops. When it stopped, I realized how tired I had been. I didn't replay the photos. I didn't reread the messages. I archived the documentation in a secure folder and closed it. Closure, I learned, isn't a dramatic feeling. It's administrative. It's when the paperwork is complete, the accounts are balanced, and there's nothing left pending. She lost both of us in the end. I didn't gain anything, but I regained something. Stability. And that was enough. I transferred the $52,000 into 2 accounts the same afternoon it cleared. College funds. One for each kid. Not as a statement. Not as symbolism. Just practical. That money came from instability. It would fund something stable. The townhouse I eventually bought is smaller than our old house. Fewer rooms. Less yard. But it's mine. When the kids are here, it feels full in a way that doesn't strain. When they're not, it's quiet without tension. I don't check phones anymore. I don't track timestamps. If someone is going to leave, they'll leave. No amount of surveillance prevents a decision already made. What changed in me wasn't hardness. It was clarity. I used to believe stability came from holding everything together. Managing moods. Anticipating shifts. Absorbing stress so the structure wouldn't crack. Now I understand something different. Stability comes from accepting what is, not what you wish it to be. The night I opened that receipt, something went cold and clear. I'm not the same man who stood at that counter. I'm quieter, more precise, and I don't ignore the quiet voice anymore. That's the end of this story. If you made it all the way here, consider subscribing to stay with us. I've placed a couple of recommended videos on screen for you. Pick one and keep watching. I'll see you in the next story.